Could you throw for 10 yards in a major college football game? Or how about 100 yards in a major college football game? You have no idea what I'm talking about, but we may get to that conversation here in a few minutes. We are talking Sooners definitely for the next, 60 minutes, depending on your comments and questions. Leave them there in the live chat. We're here for Sooners Live right here at the Voice of College Football for the 104th time. Jason Ray's always here, and we're glad of that. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing good, much better than last week at this time.
That's right.
But yeah, no, doing a lot better. Thank you, Mark.
Jason was a complete gamer. He went the full 60 last week, and he was struggling. And shoot, I made him talk for probably 56 out of the 60. But he did a great job as always, and we appreciate it. So yes, you sound much better and look strong and healthy. So Oklahoma fans are going to hope that Dylan Gabriel's strong and healthy and stays healthy for 12 plus games this season, because there was certainly a drop off last year. My goodness.
Yeah, no, there was. It was, it was hard to watch. I think, and I think not necessarily just being a fan, but just people that watch the University of Oklahoma as a program and what Oklahoma's been able to put out at the quarterback position over the last few years, and really just seeing where Oklahoma was from a backup quarterback perspective last year was, I mean, I think for Oklahoma people internally was very alarming, one, but I think nationally was a little bit of a laughing matter, looking at what Oklahoma's strategy was, particularly against Texas, when when Gabriel was out in that game. Oklahoma resorted to more of a kind of a single wing type of a quarterback system from time to time. They had Braden Willis in there from time to time, and they just weren't able to complete to do anything on a consistent basis in that game. And we all know how that game ended up for Oklahoma. And then obviously kind of the rest of the season followed suit to a certain degree. But yeah, I think that's an area, Mark, that's going to be a big thing to watch for. Is I think Oklahoma hopes to be a little bit better prepared should something happen to Dylan Gabriel this year. And obviously there's always going to be discussion on who's the best guy to lead Oklahoma right now. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately Oklahoma has to be in a much better spot to absorb an injury, at least if that were to happen, or just something for a small period of time.
So just to size up the quarterback room, of course, Nick Evers moved on to Wisconsin. Jackson Arnold is the big 5-star pickup. So there's no question that they've upgraded. That's without question. Now, is he going to be prepared to take the reins if called upon for a second half or 2 or 3 games, and hopefully no more than anything like that, an extended injury? But certainly from a talent perspective, Davis Bevel and what they had to try to piece together last year, and Dylan Gabriel's absence versus most likely handing the keys to Jackson Arnold if there should be an issue and be an injury and that situation arise, is, from, again, a talent standpoint, an enormous upgrade.
Oh, absolutely, Mark. And I think Jackson Arnold is a guy not only that Oklahoma people are super, super excited for about, but I think there's a lot of national people that think, Jackson Arnold. A lot of times this time of the year, right, you see a list of kids that are, top 10, top 15 kids as a true freshman they're equipped to come in and support and play immediately. And Jackson Arnold is typically one of those guys that's on those lists, right? Quarterback position's a little bit more difficult to come in and play immediately. We've talked about this from time to time on the show, Mark, that there's not too many true freshman quarterbacks at a big time school like Oklahoma that come in and play immediately from day one. So certainly this job is going to be Dylan Gabriel's to begin the spring and then throughout the fall. And we'll see how it goes from there. Gabriel has tons of experience in the system with Levy. This will be his 3rd year overall in the system, and I think some of it was fair, some of it was a little bit unfair in terms of the criticism that Dylan Gabriel got this year. I mean, ultimately he completed 63% of his passes, I believe 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, took care of the ball well, but there are some limitations that he has. There are some times where he holds on to the ball a little bit too long trying to make a play. There are some times where the middle of the field really eludes him just in terms of being able to have that same accuracy um, during the middle of the field. Now, outside the hash, he's excellent. Really, he's very, very accurate. He looks for that, but as we mentioned, there's times where the middle of the field was a little bit of a struggle for him in this Oklahoma program last year, moving the ball. And so, when you look at that coming into this year, you've got, I think, there's something to be said for competition behind you to push you and make you be a little bit better. Gabriel knew that there wasn't really much that he could possibly do to lose that job last year, no matter how well or no matter how poorly he played. But this year, when you have a 5 star in the pretty from most people's eyes is one of, if not the best freshman quarterback in the country coming on campus. Yeah, I think that provides a little bit of extra motivation or whatever that might be. So, yeah, this will be an interesting spring for both of these kids, right, Mark? It's the second full year in the Oklahoma levy system for Dylan Gabriel. First year, obviously, for Jackson Arnold coming in, but really, really important for him to be part of the spring. As a true freshman, be part of the spring and then be there to compete in the fall. And as you mentioned, um, you've got those two guys are really at this point fairly. I would say fairly entrenched as the 1-2 guys there. And then you've got a couple of guys. You've got Davis Bevel, that played sparingly last year, and you saw how really just ineffective he was when he was in there, particularly in that Texas game and a couple of other situations, and just kind of garbage time late. And then General Booty was there, never really got on the field, and so you've got those guys entrenched in that quarterback room, and so this is an area that I think, even though Gabriel was solid. I don't think he wasn't great. He wasn't terrible. He was solid last year from Oklahoma, but the the expectations at Oklahoma at the quarterback position isn't solid. It's you've got Heisman level, and we know that you're not gonna produce a Heisman level quarterback every single year at the University of Oklahoma or wherever that might be. But I think that the bar has been set so high that last year's performance overall wasn't quite as good as they would expect. So you got to look for you would like to see some improvement on that area for Oklahoma this year.
It's got to be an interesting, curious kind of feeling for a particular athlete when they are competing against other athletes and they can tell the differences. Now, we've all had that experience at other levels, but I'm talking about at a high level of competition for a position. So we can conjecture to a certain degree that obviously Dylan Gabriel is entrenched as the starter. He's got a stranglehold on the job, most likely.
Mhm.
But if the recruiting rankings give us any indication, there are probably, whereas as you painted the picture of what it was last season of him thinking, okay, he can recognize the talent in the room or the lack thereof and know where he stands versus knowing, okay, I am the starter and I can play this position better than anyone, but wow, we're throwing various types of passes and maybe Jackson Arnold, maybe that comes out of his hand a little bit better and he can make that throw better than that particular throw or this throw, or maybe there's just a little bit more zip or distance, or there's just that's probably an interesting just dynamic to the competition or thought process that goes through what you would think to be a very highly confident athlete who's held down a starting spot at two programs over the last 3 or 4 years, but to see maybe somebody come in that can do some things that he can't.
Yeah, I think that'll be interesting to watch, Mark, because when it'll be a little bit different. I think obviously Oklahoma's fans' first opportunity will be at the spring game to watch Jackson Arnold in person, and so I think, as you mentioned, I think that's very important, Mark. When you mention that those kind of intangibles, he's the Jackson Arnold is the prototypical guy. Like he's got a stronger arm. He's taller. He's probably a little bit quicker, a little bit more elusive. Runs the zone read probably a little bit better than Dylan Gabriel. So I think that the key is when that experience that Dylan Gabriel has that is far beyond obviously what Jackson Arnold has. The knowledge of the system is far beyond what happens when those two meet. What happens when you have a guy that has the talent of a Jackson Arnold, understands the offense, starts to get a little bit more experience, whether that's practice or whether that's in late in game situation. Where does that how does that reconcile with one another? Because we've seen in the past over some of these in some of these years, true freshmen that will maybe not necessarily be ready to start immediately as the season begins, but when you look midway through the season, we've seen a couple of situations where some of these quarterbacks have overtaken the incumbent. Trevor Lawrence is a guy that comes to mind where he started, midway through the season for Clemson a few years ago and led them to a national championship. So I think that will be the thing to kind of keep going. I mean, here we are, March 15th saying this, but I would be extremely surprised if Dylan Gabriel is not the starter for game one. However, we'll see if the things that Dylan Gabriel has struggled with a little bit this past year, if he improves on those enough to hold off on Jackson Arnold. And you talk about a guy, and it's always difficult, or maybe not difficult, but kind of an interesting proposition to talk about a kid that's never thrown a pass on the collegiate level. So you never know what that translation is going to be. There's been plenty of not miss quarterbacks that just haven't been able to put it together. So we don't know, but I think it's going to be one of those things that's going to be very intriguing to watch early on in camp, and then as the season progresses.
And it comes to mind that in past years, and certainly last offseason, Jason and I put together a list of a much better list, but I certainly supplemented it with a list of position rankings in the Big 12. And maybe we'll do that again this summer going into August camp to see where Dylan Gabriel would stack up against Big 12 competition with 4 new teams coming into the league as well. As you mentioned to me, Jason, before we started to record, Oklahoma, not that we've got a lot of information here, but Oklahoma does have a committed quarterback for 2025 in Kevin Sperry. And interesting to note that they do not have a quarterback commit for 2024, but Sperry, no rankings or ratings on the 247 Sports composite, but he does have 21 offers, including Arizona State, Baylor, Florida State. So some pretty significant offers there. So he's obviously well thought of to catch Brent Venables' eye and all these other programs. But still trying to figure out between, let's see, we're now at, we're still at about 9 months away from National Signing Day in December, but to come up with a quarterback for the 2024 class. But Sperry, the target right now and the commit for 2025.
Yeah, no, it's kind of a laughing matter. I mean, across the Oklahoma circle, just not really from a concerning perspective, but just the fact that Oklahoma does have their first commitment of the 2025 cycle before they've got any in the 2024 cycle. But he's a kid that this kind of come together fairly quickly. Mark. He's a guy that just recently got just recently was offered, and then he took he took and made the commitment fairly quickly after that. So this is something that he uh, was super. He being Kevin Sperry was super excited about from the Oklahoma perspective, and it came together very quickly. So I certainly expect Oklahoma to start getting some of those 24 guys. There's been a lot of movement on some of those guys, but it'll be interesting to see how quickly. But just you don't really see that very often, that you have a commitment from 2 years ahead of time as opposed to next year at this point.
Leave your comments and questions here at the Voice of College Football in the chat, and we will get to them. Keep in mind that we come your way each and every Wednesday, typically at 11:30 a.m. Central Time, but sometimes we got to switch it up based on scheduling conflicts. So please subscribe to the channel. And as has been mentioned by a number of people, thank you so much for encouraging everyone there in the chat to hit the like button. It just takes a second. Please hit the like button and subscribe here at the Voice of College Football. Also understand that if you're a college football nerd, that we've got these kind of shows all over the place on various channels throughout the week. USC on Monday. I know that's a bad word, but USC on Monday, Iowa and Nebraska on Tuesday. We just finished up Ohio State this morning. We've got Michigan, Florida State, and Miami on Wednesday. We've got another Miami show on Thursday. Yes, they support it, for all those detractors that get on me for having two Miami shows, but they're supported, so we do them. And we've got a West Virginia show as well. So head on over to those particular channels. If you just go to Voice of College Football and type in the name of the team, and most likely we've got them covered. I mentioned to Jason before we started to record that I came across this on Twitter today as I was posting the link to the live stream, that there was a video on TikTok, which I'm not on TikTok, but it was posted on Twitter, that a guy was saying that he gets into an argument with his buddy as to whether they would be able to play quarterback in an NFL game, full throttle. Now, offensive line, defensive line, let's say everybody's generally even. You're not facing the best defense in the NFL and you've got the worst offensive line. It's generally, excuse me, even. And debating as to whether they could complete passes that would gain at least 10 yards during an NFL game. And then this guy goes on his little rant. It's got like 600,000 views because people are interested in this kind of debate. But this guy is pretty cocky about this. And he doesn't look like, it's not like, he's Dylan Gabriel 15 years from now. And, he just got done with his 8-year NFL career. And he's like 3 years later, yeah, I could go into an NFL game and complete. This guy looked like an ordinary dude. And he's saying that he could throw for 100 yards in an NFL game. So I find that difficult to believe, especially when occasionally NFL quarterbacks themselves are hard pressed to throw for 100 yards in a game. But 10 yards? That's a tough one, because for one thing, this guy was surmising that, well, I got 4 quarters to do this. I don't know if you've got 4 quarters. You might be taken off on a stretcher by the end of the first quarter. We're going full throttle here, and you're probably going to take 8 or 10 or 12 hits to some degree, whether that's just somebody got a shoulder, and pushed you in the back, or if you got a full on,
yeah, it's
contact.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think when you take that into perspective, you have to think about what kind of relative shape that we're in,
Yeah.
compared to those guys that are out there. I mean, when you think about it, you think about 10. As we were talking about before, 10 yards, you can complete a couple of screen passes and feel like that you can probably get 10 yards. But to your point, first time you drop back to pass, you could you could take a bad hit and you're done. There's no way no way you can get to that 10 yards. But I agree with you overall. I think the 100 yards is very extremely unrealistic. There's no I don't I wouldn't say there's no way, but there's a very small window in which a normal person, that's not already in the NFL, doesn't play college or anything like that, just an old retired, you know, um, athlete like either one of us that's played at least at some point in their life. I think that would be asking way too much.
So I'm 5'11", so I guess I'm maybe a shade taller than a Kyler Murray or somebody like that, because that's my first thought is, can I see what's going on downfield? For one thing, I'm not I wouldn't be used to just trying to just pick out a lane or just get the ball out of the pocket with a bunch of 6'7" mammoth bodies in front of me just to get it out. So I would be kind of blindly maybe throwing the ball, knowing what the route is to try to get it out of my hand quickly and hope somebody can take it for 10 yards. But yeah, that would be fun. That would be fun to do if you could eliminate the risk of injury. Like
That's
if
right.
somebody could
Right.
guarantee me you're not going to get hurt, then I'd be like, oh, yeah, this will be fun.
Yeah,
But
let's do it. Yeah. Well, those are the fun topics to talk about this time of the year. Yeah, but no, I'm with you. If you could, it'd be fun if you knew there was no chance that you had like a halo around you or something like that, that that they couldn't hit you and you wouldn't get injured. Yeah, that's a lot more fun without the risk of being injured and getting hit hard.
and I will even say this, even if you're used to working out, and even though throwing passes downfield or not even downfield, just throwing the ball from the pocket doesn't seem like it's overly taxing from a physical standpoint. I bet if you've got the pads on and the helmet and you're dropping back to pass and you're taking a few seconds, then you deliver the ball. Let's say nobody even hits you. And then, let's say you get your 3-yard gain and you just got to move the ball up, and then you got to repeatedly do that
Hmm.
uh, for 8 or 10 or 12 plays if you were successful, obviously, to extend the drive. That would you'd be I bet you would be out. Most people, even if they're in decent shape, would be kind of out of breath. Like
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
it's just a different exercise. I almost think of I play horse with my son a lot.
Hmm.
And then we played last summer. He wanted to play one on one. We were playing extremely short games one on one, and I haven't played one on one basketball for years and years and years and years. And we
Hmm.
just played like games to 3, and I was exhausted. I was just exhausted.
Yeah. No, I know the feeling. I mean, I coach, and so when I actually get out there and try to actually do some things, with the kids and stuff like that, like it's taxing. Like when we're a lot of times we would do drills last year towards the end of the season around just competitive shots. So I would, they would pass around the perimeter to each other, and I would go defend them. And so after a while, we would do this at all five spots of the court. And after a while, like I was having trouble breathing myself. So yeah, and I think that and back to the point that you were making about this little, this theme here. That I mean, it's one thing you're just dropping back and and you're playing 7-on-7, but understanding, and I think the premise behind this is the defense is going to play the way that they would play as if it was a regular game. So they're disguising their blitzes, they're disguising coverages, they're playing man, sometimes they're playing zone. What are they? I mean, so you've got to think about not only just the physical ability to be able to do this, but also understanding and not really having any, real training and film watching and understanding, okay, you're you're having to dissect this defense that you have, very little about. So it's not about just going out there and just, okay, I can go complete, you know, these passes against these guys that they're the best players in the world, but at the same time, like, oh, it's just 7-on-7. No, it's going to be like a regular situation. So it would just be, for me, everything combined, I agree with you. It would be next to impossible.
I think it would be, at least my approach would be, I'm not going to try to read anything. I'm going to lock on one guy and I'm going there. I'm probably going to one of the slot receivers because it's the shortest distance, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm just getting the ball out of my hand and hope that they beat their guy for at least, a step or two, and hopefully I throw a decent enough pass. And I again just think it would be extremely psychologically intimidating, but also just physically, with 10 bodies in front of you that are mammoth, and just that feeling of that wall just closing in on you like that, and just having a few seconds to get that ball out where you probably can't have a really good feel or vision of where you're going with the ball and who's open. And yeah, it would be fascinating.
Yeah, it definitely would be. I think it would be a lot harder than some people make it out to believe.
We had this conversation on the Ohio State show, and Mars Jams 2's comment takes me back to that. I did not intend to bring this up, but maybe OU fans were taking a bit uh, of backlash in the chat for whatever reason, a little bit of trolling, a little friendly trolling, never hurt anyone. But Mars Jams 2 is sticking up for OU with the litany of national championships, conference championship, Heisman Trophy winners. We know that Oklahoma is a top five-ish brand in the history of college football. But we had a question/comment made by a viewer in the chat during the Ohio State show, and they basically during my lifetime, let's say the last 50 years, they just listed a number of years that if you're an Ohio State fan, just kind of make you shudder, because we're talking about excruciatingly close near misses to national championships. They're just, I know I have a biased perspective on it, so I'm not going to say this for sure, but it just seems as though they've got an inordinate amount of just excruciatingly close national championship misses. Just like last year, they kick a 50-yard field goal, they're most likely beating TCU, and they would be the national champions right now, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Does Oklahoma, what years do you think it got away from them? Are there years that make you think, well, if this would have happened this way, or if they would have gotten this bounce, things could have turned out differently and they might have been able to add to their championship list?
Yeah, I think there's two years really that come to mind for me, Mark. 2003, where unfortunately Jason White kind of got had some issues towards the end of the year with his arm, in which he wasn't quite as effective as he was early in the year. So the first 11 games of that season, actually first 12 games of that season, Oklahoma was one of their best offensive seasons, one of the best defensive performances they've had in quite some time. And Oklahoma goes and they lose to Kansas State 35-7 in the Big 12 championship game, and they're able to come back and they play LSU in that national championship game, and really in LSU's backyard. And Oklahoma loses 21-14, and I mean, and you could see Jason White was really just a shell of himself in that game, and still gave Oklahoma an opportunity late in the game. Really had a wide open Kewan Jones in the back of the end zone there in that game, and had that went a little bit differently, if he wouldn't have overthrown him. I think that's a game, that's a championship that Oklahoma probably feels like it was a little bit of a near miss in that season. Then you go the next one that I think of. I think this is, and sometimes I get my years mixed up here. So I believe this was 2007. So this is and I may have the year wrong, but this is Sam Bradford's sophomore year um, at Oklahoma. They play Florida, Tim Tebow, in the national championship game.
Oh, wait.
Again. Oh, wait. Okay. Um, lose that game 24-14. Oklahoma's in it. I mean, I think one of the big difference makers in that game was DeMarco Murray got hurt in a Big 12 championship game on the kickoff return, and you never know whoever you have. And but in Oklahoma was missing a couple of at least one linebacker in that game, and so I don't think Florida was quite as good. That's that season. But again, this was a Heisman Trophy winning season for Oklahoma. This team was probably, Mark, I would say, a little bit more dynamic and a little bit better on the offensive side of the ball, but not quite as good defensively as the 2003 team. Because you got to remember, this was the team up until the Florida game that had, I believe, 5 straight games of 60+ points in the regular season. Culminating with that game against, I believe it was against Missouri in the Big 12 championship game. It wasn't. No, it wouldn't have been Missouri. I'm sorry, Colorado in the Big 12 championship game that year. Oh, no, maybe I had it right the first time. Maybe it was Missouri. I'm trying to remember.
I think it was
Missouri. Yeah,
I think it was Missouri.
Yeah. And so Oklahoma played well in the bowl game, in the championship game against Florida, but I think they were missing a little bit of that dynamic from DeMarco Murray there in that game. So yeah, that's right, that was Missouri. And so that was the year where Oklahoma lost to Texas earlier in the year, and there was a lot of controversy, just Oklahoma even being in that game. Right, and I think the tiebreaker ended up being Oklahoma's BCS ranking was ahead of Texas at that time, and that got them to the Big 12 championship game, and then ultimately got them to the game against Florida. But I mean, as you can see here, this was a really, really good offensive team, but struggled a little bit on the defensive side of the ball. Particularly towards the latter part of the season. So. But they played well defensively in that game against Florida, holding Tebow and company to 24 points, but just couldn't really get it done on the offensive side of the ball. And so those are the 2 years that kind of come to mind. And I think really at that point, Mark, there was some concern with Oklahoma's ability to put up points in a big game. Even and through Bob Stoops' tenure, honestly, as you went through there, and then because you looked at, even with the national championship in 2000, that was a 13-point effort. Against LSU, they lost 21-14. This game that we'd mentioned here, 24-14, against obviously this game was never really close until after the first quarter, but when they played in the Orange Bowl against USC in 2004, believe it was 55-19 was the score. So I think at this point, Mark, even though the transition from regular season to postseason on the offensive side of the ball wasn't really happening. Now, I mean, Oklahoma has kind of over the last few years, and even though that obviously they haven't won any of the playoff games, they've been able to put up points in these games. Right, but obviously the defense has been the key. But those are the two near that I think that from a national championship perspective, those were the two near misses that you look back and felt like that Oklahoma really let one slip away and really had a good opportunity to win championships in those 2 seasons.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I don't have a whole lot to add to that. Certainly remember those 2 games. And yeah, when you put up the numbers as we just did from that 2008 team in particular, and really all the Stoops teams and all the better Stoops teams, but 50 touchdowns from Sam Bradford against only 8 interceptions. And then we saw as Jason outlined, the 5 consecutive 60-point games and 58 the week before that streak started. So, man, they were putting up some ridiculous point totals at the conclusion of that season, including 3 against top 15 teams in the country: Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, and Missouri. So, yeah. Modern day caveman is making a comment here about recruiting coming up. I expect a lot of possible future OU recruits to make a decision once they see how we stand against Texas. You think there's anything to that?
I mean, there's always battles between Oklahoma and Texas all across. I mean, I'm not quite sure if the comment's very specific to what the head-to-head looks like this year from Oklahoma versus Texas, or just the trajectory of the season this year between Oklahoma and Texas. But I think there's always a lot of kids that Oklahoma and Texas are going head-to-head against, and that'll continue to be the case. And it's the 49-0 loss. It's damaging without a doubt. I think it's damaging, and I don't know how damaging it is, but I mean, you can't really say it was too damaging from a recruiting perspective, since Oklahoma, still landed in the top 5 from a recruiting class. But I think going forward, if this is something that looks like could be a trend in terms of for Oklahoma. But I think we talked about this a lot last week, Mark, and I think it's not necessarily just. This is one of the biggest years that I think Oklahoma has had, that will have in quite some time, for different reasons, right? I mean, we've talked about here, through the years, where Oklahoma has a good opportunity to win a Big 12 championship and potentially put themselves in position to play for a national championship, or a playoff spot, or whatever that might look like. And I think the expectations are different realistically, right? I mean, I think the expectations are, you coming off of a 6-7 season to, right the ship to a certain degree. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of people. There's always, and there's some on here, I'm sure, but there's always these diehard Crimson Colored Glass fans that feel like, okay, this is a team that has a chance to go undefeated and get to the playoffs. But I think realistically, as you look at this team ushering themselves into a new era next year, will be the fact that you don't want a 7-6. You really don't even want like an 8-5 type of season going into the SEC, where you've got the challenges that you would always face going into the SEC. It's a different brand of football. It's a different level of physicality that these teams bring game in and game out. But when you're at a position where you're not really competing at a high level in the Big 12, and then you move to the SEC, that could be a big challenge, and it's going to be a big challenge regardless. But I think looking at that, it's very important for Oklahoma to take a step up this year, and certainly, if I think you never know what these. I mean, I don't think anybody at this time had any kind of idea that TCU was going to win the conference and go to the playoffs, right? So you never truly know what's going to happen, but they don't necessarily. You wouldn't appear to think that, okay, Oklahoma's a team that they're the odds-on favorites to win this Big 12 and get back to the playoffs. But I think just seeing that improvement this year is going to be just extremely critical for the program going into the SEC.
That conference is going to be so stacked. I'm looking at the recruiting rankings for 2023. And if you include Texas and Oklahoma in the SEC, then the top 4 classes, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma, come from what is going to be the SEC. And 6 of the top 9 and 10 of the top 17 classes in America. There are going to be teams, and the SEC is probably going to go to a 9-game schedule. There are going to be teams in the SEC that go 4-5, 5-4 in the conference, and they may not be ranked in the top 25, but they're going to be among the 15 or 20 best teams in the country.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I think that's going to be something interesting, Mark, as we look at the expansion of the playoffs. What's that value look like? Excuse me, across the board when you're when you're looking at this new format. To your point, do you have a team? I mean, just since it's here, let's just say Oklahoma 4-5 as a really really strong team, but you've got a team like, let's just say, Clemson, maybe has only a couple of losses, but the perceived strength of the conference isn't quite as strong. So I think that's going to be something that's very intriguing to look at as we go into this new era of playoff and conference realignment.
The SEC, I did the quick math, and I believe this is perfect. The SEC is 14-2 in the playoff since 2015. So if that continues, I think this is the point you were making, that basically that committee, they can't judge a 10-2 team in the SEC versus a 10-2 team somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
If that just continues to prove itself, that the conference is that much better, and I think that every season should be evaluated on its own merit, and we shouldn't be looking at history. We shouldn't, but that thought's not going to leave the minds of the committee that, okay, this league proves itself every year.
Mm-hmm.
So the benefit of the doubt should go to this league. And again, it's typically proven in the non-conference schedule as well. But just that's Alabama, Georgia, LSU, of course, those 3
Mm-hmm.
coming through in the playoffs. Again, 14-2 is just, that is stellar. I made the comment, and it didn't make Big 12 fans very happy, that post 2023, and most likely the Big 12 is not going to win the national championship this year, but I was thinking more, okay, once Oklahoma and Texas leave, a couple different people were arguing with me, and we'll see how it plays out. It can be proven or disproven. I'm not going to go 25 years down the road, because who knows what's going to happen there. But I said, for the foreseeable future, let's say 2030, I don't see that there's any way that the Big 12 wins a national championship. I just don't. If you take Oklahoma and Texas out, the first question is, who's the last team to win a national championship out of the Big 12? You got to go back to
Probably Texas 2005.
No, outside of Oklahoma.
Oh, outside of Oklahoma, yeah.
Taking them out.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
You have to go back. I think you have to go back to like the 30s.
Yeah. Oh, you're probably right. Yeah.
It's only Oklahoma and Texas have won national championships.
Yep, you're right.
I think it's like TCU in the 30s.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Who's going to win national championships out of the Big 12?
Well, and that's why we've kind of, and this is, I mean, I know we've got some West Virginia people on here that have been on here, and no disrespect to some of those teams, and that's why we've said that I think the Big 12 has done about as good of a job as they could have in terms of doing what they can to make the conference still be legitimate in some form or fashion, but they've moved themselves, unfortunately, without Oklahoma and Texas, into more of a American Athletic Conference type of feeling with it, right? I mean, because you're to your point, that you've made, there's not been. I mean, TCU's the closest as of last year, that has made the playoffs and ended up making it to the national championship game. But you've got these teams that have not done a whole lot of things on the national level. So it's going to be hard pressed to see anyone, to your point, winning, let alone maybe even making the playoffs. I mean, you could see probably a TCU or a Baylor or Oklahoma State from time to time, maybe having that really, really good magical year where they make the playoffs. But yeah, I think it's going to be few and far between. And then you also think about the aspect of, do they earn the respect? Do they get the same respect? Does a undefeated TCU without Oklahoma and Texas in the league get the same respect as the undefeated TCU from this season? I
Yeah,
don't know.
my thought process also was that we go to a 12 team playoff, and that seems to make fans of lesser programs, I don't mean lesser like Kansas, I mean that are still competitive, the Penn States of the world, to think, okay, it's open to up to us. And that's true. The opportunities are there, but those wild card spots are going to be taken up by the SEC and the Big Ten. Yes, the Big 12 champion will be in the playoff, and I would expect that a second place team in the Big 12 would make a 12 team playoff.
Mhm.
The problem is my argument isn't whether there are going to be teams in the playoffs. They'll be in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But now they've got to win 3 or 4 games against that kind of competition. TCU, give them all the credit in the world. They beat Michigan, but they they accomplished that, and then they ran into what we saw.
Mhm.
Uh, but I just don't think TCU does what TCU did this year if they've got to run through, and they didn't win the conference. So they would have to win 4 games to win a national championship.
Mhm.
They're going to run into like Tennessee, Ohio State, Alabama, something like that to get to a national championship game.
Well, not to mention that first game is likely going to be at the other team, like
Yeah.
Tennessee's home stadium, right? In the
Yeah,
in the
depending on how it
situation
shakes
that
out, but yeah.
how it works out. But yeah, but no, it's difficult. I mean, you run into the same situation, from an NCAA tournament perspective. Yeah, I mean, everybody has a chance. Even your 16 seeds have a chance, but um, and then even more so in conference, in these basketball conference tournaments, that teams that they have to make a run and they have to win these conference tournaments just to make it to the NCAA tournament. Yeah, conceivably they have the opportunity, but a lot of these teams, if they're not already in the running to make the tournament, they're going to have to win like 4 games. And I know it's a little bit different, but 4 games in 4 days, which is this kind of the same thing, but you're going to have to win 4 games here to win a championship. And it's going to be so difficult, but it'll be fun to watch for sure.
And I don't think Georgia was 65-7 better than TCU. Of course, they were on that night, but Georgia wasn't beating Vanderbilt 65-7. So I just think a lot of things came together. But I also think what happened was something that concerned me about TCU getting through Michigan, and that's that they would be beat up and spent. And I think that was part of it too. They just didn't have the layers and layers of high 4 and 5 stars to kind of muscle through that. Taking on one really emotional, difficult physical game and then having to turn around and play another one.
Yep, you're right.
All right. Last comment here. Yes, I don't know if that's uh, tongue-in-cheek comment. Yes, Nebraska was arguably the program of the 90s. They won 3 national championships. Yes. But they're a long ways away from that.
Well, and they were maybe the comment was in relation to the Big 12 and anyone other than, but they were. I don't. They never won a championship as part of the Big 12. It was always part of the Big 8, right? Did they win a national
No, they
championship?
did. They so the Big 12 first season would have been 96. So Nebraska did win one national championship,
Okay.
97.
So,
Good call. Thank you. I don't know what your name is. It's really long and complicated, but that's a good call right there. Yes.
yeah.
So Nebraska would have been the last out of the Big 12. My point was out of the existing Big 12. That's why I said take out Oklahoma and Texas. But historically, you're correct. Yeah, I think like Sammy Baugh at TCU won a national championship. It's like that.
Yeah.
It's been Oklahoma and Texas. They've owned the league on a national scale. All right. Appreciate everybody being here. We expect it to be typically on Wednesday, so please lock it in. But subscribe and hit that bell for the notifications, and therefore you can track if we need to move the show. But typically Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. Jason, appreciate you being here and getting this done each and every week. And have a great rest of your week.
Yes, sir. Same to you.